Alright guys, MTech Guy here, and today we're going to be carrying out a coolant change on a BMW E46 330i. Now it is a maintenance job that I've been wanting to get done since I bought the vehicle, and it's the only fluid that hasn't been changed other than the transmission fluid since I bought the vehicle. Now I have no idea what coolant's in the vehicle, I don't know what type it is, I don't know how contaminated it is, I don't know how old it is, I don't even know if it's compatible with what's recommended from BMW. Now if you've been following the channel, you'll have seen that I did have a coolant leak recently and we got the upper radiator hose replaced. Now I did take a small amount of coolant out the system following bleed in the system, and I did see that it was blue, but that doesn't always mean that it's the BMW coolant or compatible. Nowadays there's lots of different colours, the colour doesn't always dictate what type of coolant it is. And also the biggest thing that stood out to me was it looked very weak and pale, very weak mixture. So I certainly will be pleased to get this job done today. So we're going to completely drain the cooling system, we're going to drain the radiator and the block, get all of the old coolant out of the system, and then we're going to refill it with brand new fresh coolant that's going to probably last for a good 6, 7, 8 years. Right, let's take a look at what I've bought to carry out the job today. Now this is the Nulon Blue coolant. It's an Australian brand and it is compatible with the BMW spec. You can use it as a complete replacement or you can use it as a top-up with the genuine BMW stuff already in your cooling system. Now as it happened, the premix version of this was on sale at the moment. It was 25% off. Now the cooling system in the E46, if I remember rightly, holds about 8 or 9 litres. So I've got two 6-litre bottles here, so I've got 12 litres altogether, so I'm going to be left with plenty for a top-up in the future. And of course, this being an E46, I'm sure I'll need it at some point, so there was a good saving to be had there. And then the other thing that we're going to need is the aluminium drain plug crush washer for the block drain, so we want to get that replaced. We don't want any leaks. That was very cheap. It's a genuine BMW part, and what I'll do is I'll leave the part number in the description below. Right, let's get into it. So first things first, what we need to do is get the front end of the car up in the air to be able to give us enough room to get underneath to be able to drain the coolant, and also it's going to raise our fill point at the expansion tank, so that's going to create a nice high point there when we come to bleed the system. Now I have made a previous video about how to jack up an E46, I'll leave a link at the top of the screen here for that one now. So now that the front end of the car's up in the air and we've got access to underneath, we can now remove the under tray. So this is held in place with a few of these Phillips screws. Now these don't come straight out, you just need to turn them, wind them back, and they'll retain in the tray itself, but you'll feel it when they pop out. And there's normally some plastic pins that hold the front here to the bumper. These are missing on mine, whatever. So now we can drain the radiator, and the drain plug is this blue one here, lives on the left hand side of the radiator down at the bottom here. Now I normally use a big flat blade screwdriver to undo this. Just be mindful that it is plastic. These things can break when the car gets this old, so just go careful. So we'll get that removed and we'll drain the radiator. That's the drain plug out. So now we'll go under the bonnet and we'll remove the expansion tank cap and the bleeder screw, and then that'll just let a bit of atmospheric pressure in the top there and drain the rest of the system. And now the radiator's finished taking a leak, we can reinstall the drain plug. Right, now next up we need to find the block drain plug. Now that lives on the right hand side of the engine. This is a right hand drive car, so I'm on the driver's side. So we take a look under here between the air conditioning compressor and your steering rack. If you take a look right up there, and that's it, just there, with the wee hex head on it. So to gain access to it can be quite tricky. Now this being an early E46, it doesn't have the big aluminium brace underneath, it's just got this wee steel tubular triangle brace. Now if you do have the big aluminium brace underneath, it will make it a bit more awkward, but it's just a case of getting creative with some sockets, extensions and universal joints. Just have to be careful when you're screwing it back in after you've drained the coolant, that it goes in nice and straight. You do not want to cross thread it, because obviously this is an aluminium block. If you're not careful, it can happen quite easily, and that's the last thing you want to be doing. So just go careful with it. Right, let's get the plug out. And this takes a 13mm socket. Now the catalytic converter is in the way to be able to get a straight shot onto the drain plug, of course. There's no room to swing a ratchet up there. There's not much room to get an extension on the socket. So what I've got set up here, so I've got a universal joint straight off the back of the socket. And I've got a long extension, and that should bring it out just far enough so I've got room to swing the ratchet. And this is where the job starts to get messy. So that's the block drained. Now we can reinstall the block drain plug, but before we do so, if you take a look, normally what happens is the old crush washer will stick to the block, so we need to remove that first. Of course, it's landed in the engine mount. There we go, so that's the old crush washer. New crush washer. And now we can reinstall the block drain plug. Tighten her up. Now this doesn't need to be insanely tight. All you're doing is just compressing the aluminium crush washer to create the seal. Just remember, this is an aluminium block, so we don't want to risk damaging the block threads. There we go. And then if we jump in the car, we're going to turn the ignition to position 1. We're not going to start the engine. Then we want to turn the heater to the hottest temperature and the lowest fan speed. So now that all the drain plugs are buttoned up underneath the vehicle, we can pour the coolant in. Now, the one I've bought is a pre-mix. It's ready just to pour straight in. But if you have concentrate, you need to mix that 50-50 with water, ideally demineralized water, unless your tap water is really good quality where you live. So we'll start pouring the coolant in, and we're going to do it very, very slowly, and that's going to allow any of the trapped air to slowly make its way to the top. So the idea is we want to fill the cooling system from bottom to top, and we want to push all that air out the top of the filler neck here, and also we've still got that vent plug removed, and that'll bleed all the air out to the top. I'm going to pour this in nice and slowly, and we're going to keep filling it until we see the fresh coolant come out the bleeder screw opening on top of the radiator hose there. And as the level comes up, you'll first see some bubbles come out of that bleeder screw opening. So we want to keep pouring until all them bubbles disappear and it's just solid liquid coming out of there. So it's slowly coming up now. There we go. As you can see, it's belched a few bubbles out there to start off with. What I like to do is just give the upper hose a little squeeze to belch any extra air. We'll keep going with the pour. It's got nice solid liquid coming out of there now. We can now reinstall the radiator bleed screw. Now that's all full of liquid. So that's pretty much the coolant fill finished now. So now we just need to bleed the system. So essentially what we've done is filled the cooling system right up to the bottom of the filler neck there. So we've pushed all of that air out right to the top and it's just solid liquid in there now. Now there are different ways you can bleed this system, but this is the way I do it. So we've filled it right to the top there. We're not going to run the engine or anything like that. What we're going to do now is refit the expansion tank filler cap. I'm going to run the engine until the temperature gauge comes to full temperature. Normally what I do is take it for a quick spin just around the local neighbourhood. I don't like to go too far just in case there is a problem. Keep an eye on the temperature gauge, make sure it stays in the middle. If it starts creeping up hotter, you need to pull over and check everything. And also you want to make sure that your heater does blow hot air, and that's a good indication that there's no trapped air in the system. And then once I've run it up to temperature, I'll give the car a quick visual from underneath the bonnet, and I'll also just take a look underneath the car just to make sure there's no coolant dripping, make sure we don't have any leaks. And I'll leave it overnight. I'll let it cool right down, completely cool, and then the next morning what I'll do is remove the expansion tank cap and just check this level. Now at the moment it looks like it's at the correct level, but that bobber is pushed right up. So once it's been run up to temperature and then cooled down the next morning, you'll normally find that the level is now reduced. It should be more or less at the correct level. Sometimes it'll be sitting a little bit low and you might need to top it up. Other times you'll still feel a bit of resistance where it's been pushed right to the top there. And what I do is just remove a little bit of the coolant until it's at the point where it's just floating and not pushed right up. And of course you want to look at the diagram on the tab here for your minimum and maximum marks when you're filling it or taking a little bit out. Right, so we can reinstall the cap, and then we can now reinstall the under tray, lower the car back down onto its wheels, and I'll take it for a short run to get it up to temperature, and then we'll leave it to sit overnight. Now I've got the new coolant here that I poured in, the premix, and then I've got the old stuff that I drained out there, and you can see quite a bit of difference with the sunlight shining through there. Now that definitely looks green. It does have a little bit of a blue tinge to it, so maybe it got topped up with some genuine stuff at some point, but the majority of it looks like a green coolant. Of course this is nice and blue, just like the genuine BMW stuff that this new coolant is compatible with. So the new one's nice and clear. The old one's a bit murky, a bit old, and it doesn't even look like the right coolant, so I'm really pleased about that changed out today. Much happier with the blue stuff in there, and that'll last quite a number of years. So the car's been running for some time now, and it's nice and warmed up. You see the temperature gauge is up to temperature, but we're not creeping up over that halfway mark. So that's all looking good, and the heaters are pumping out nice hot air. And now that cooling system's warmed up, we'll just take a look underneath the vehicle just to make sure we've got no coolant dripping down, no coolant leaks. It's all looking nice and dry. And while that cooling system's warm, we will take a look under the bonnet here also, just to make sure there's no coolant leaks, that blue screw's not leaking, the radiator cap. And as you can see, the engine bay's looking nice and clean now. What I did when I got everything back together, I gave everything a hose down and a good clean up just to get rid of all that residual coolant, the old coolant that had been splashing around. So that gives us a nice clean surface now, and a good telltale sign to find out if you do have a coolant leak with the under tray on the vehicle there. Every now and again, maybe once every couple of weeks, come and check the oil, check your coolant level. And what I normally do is just shine a torch down the front here and just check that engine under tray. Make sure there's no white spots, no coolant stains. See any dried coolant down there, then it's a good indication that it's leaking from somewhere. But anyhow, so far everything's looking good. So what I'll do now, I'll shut it off, I'll leave it to sit overnight, and then we'll come back when it's completely cooled down, and we'll just check that level again, because it should have now dropped down to more or less where it should be. Right, it's the next morning, the engine's nice and cold, so we'll recheck the level now. It should have reduced a fair bit. Perfect. Alright guys, there we have it. That's that maintenance job sorted on a BMW E46 330i, and we've got the job done by spending as little money as possible. Now if you found the video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW DIY content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.